So I'd like to start then by asking if there are any apologies. We've received apologies from Councillor Oliver, so that's noted, thank you. And are there any declarations of interest? Do any members have any other declarations of interest to make on any items? Councillor BC, sorry. I do apologise. Brochek Colton.
Yeah, Councillor Brochek Colton. Another interest, I'm the manager of Silver Road Community Centre, and we've just been given some monies from the HAF, and you'll be talking about that later on. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Brochek Colton. The next item is questions from the public. We have 2 questions. They've been received in time and in the proper form. The first question is from Mr. James Packham. Mr. Packham, can you just make yourself known, please? Thank you. Mr. Packham, would you please ask your question, and you'll be shown which microphone to approach in order to do so. Go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you for hearing my question this evening. My question is very brief, so I'm going to just introduce it, if I may, with just 2 lines of context. Many of us this evening probably have more football on our minds, maybe, than tennis courts, grass tennis courts. But on that, I'd just ask you briefly to cast your minds back a few weeks and recall the moment when you heard, if you are a football fan, that the 6 English football clubs, the 6 richest, were going to join the European Super League. I know I felt strongly that the rug had been pulled beneath my feet, with no say, no consultation, just like the fans on the television. And that's pretty much exactly how local residents feel about what's being done at Higham Park right now. They have no say, or they feel they have no say, and no proper and fair consultation. So my question tonight is the following. In relation to the Council's planning application for hard tennis courts at Higham Park, the Council did not carry out a pre-application consultation with local residents. This is contrary to the Council's policy, as stated on page 24 of Statement of Community Involvement for Norwich, a code of practice for involving the community in planning issues, dated November 2016, amended September 2020. Subsequently, once the Council's plan had been submitted and then resubmitted, the plan received 120 formal objections, mainly from local residents, as against 10 letters that were letters in favour. The Council did not take serious notice of these objections and approved its own application. Local residents to Higham Park remain very much against the Council's plan and are left with minimal faith in the planning process. So, my question, will the Council now consider carrying out a proper and fair consultation that seeks to understand and leverage the views and wishes of local residents? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Packham. Councillor Stannard.
Thank you. And thank you, Mr. Packham, for your question. The Council's statement of community involvement was included in the Council's planning application, describing the communications plan for the Norwich Park's tennis expansion project, and arrangements for consultation around proposals for Higham Park, including discussing outline proposals with Friends of Higham Park and Higham Park Tennis Club. A technical recommendation from the Lawn Tennis Association detailing layout and lighting was shared with the groups, who were invited to raise issues before submission. Before that, the council, as applicant, consulted with the Gardens Trust, meeting on site with the drawings, with revisions being made following their objections to the original application. The proposals were revised following this meeting, taking on board the Trust's comments. The consultation complied with all the requirements in force at the time. Delivery of the project is now at an advanced stage, and having started, there is no requirement for any further consultation as part of the planning process.
Mr. Packham, you're allowed one supplementary question. Do you have a supplementary question?
Yes, I'll have a crack. Thank you.
Please go ahead. You've got 1 minute to ask your question.
Thanks. The council have repeatedly said to us, or said to people, not to me, that they did carry out a rigorous planning consultation. I want to just run through very quickly how the consultation pieces that I know about. So having proceeded in the application process without a pre-application consultation, with the, as I said, the 120 against the 10, also in 2018, the Grass Tennis Group invited the council to their own consultation, but the council ignored and did not reply. In 2020, a petition was raised by a local resident. 703 people signed that petition against the council's plan. Those findings were presented to this council, and they were ignored, those 700. Going back to 2018, the Friends of the Higham Park surveyed themselves after a meeting where the council was present. Of their total 34 signed up, paid up, members at the time, only three members voted in favour of the council plan, against the 20 or so who voted against it for the final count.
Mr. Packham,
Am I okay?
Could you move to your question, please?
Would you mind if I just mention my own small campaign that I've started? It'll be 30 seconds, and then I'll mention the question.
You've already had 1.5 minutes. Please move to your supplementary question.
Well, okay. I had about 3 or 4 lines to go, but I'll do that.
Go ahead.
So my follow-up, thank you. So my follow-up question, please, is that with these facts and with the local significance of this project, I'm asking, how could the council contemplate spending over £250,000 without asking local people what they want as part of a proper and fair consultation? That's my question.
Thank you, Mr. Packham. Councillor Stannard, would you please give your reply?
Yes, I can respond to the points which have been made. The first thing I would repeat again, that proper procedure was followed. And it's important to understand that a consultation is not a referendum. They're two very different things. A consultation is giving people the opportunity to comment on the planning issues so that those comments can be taken into account. And a valid comment only needs to be made once. It's not 100 times more valid because 100 people make it 100 times, and vice versa. So we look at all comments received, and we weigh all in terms of the planning regulations and planning law, and that's how consultations work. As I say, proper procedure was followed. Informal consultations by third parties are not part of the formal planning process. They're very interesting, but the way to influence a consultation is to respond to that consultation at the time. And I'd repeat again, legally we've gone through all the processes we need to. We believe that we acted absolutely correctly, and there is no legal reason, there is no reason why we should now revisit that.
Thank you, Councillor Stannard. So we have another question, but before we do that, Mr. Pack, thank you very much for coming. You're welcome to stay for the whole meeting, But if you wish to leave, nobody will think anything of it.
All right,
Okay,
thank you.
thank you. The second question is from Mr. Anthony Mullen. Mr. Anthony Mullen, can I just identify Mr. Mullen?
I'm here.
Would you please ask your question?
I will indeed. Thank you for this opportunity to ask a question. I believe I'm going to be asking it of the Cabinet Member for Health and Wellbeing. Thank you. Before I do, I thought I'd just quote something to you from one of your excellent documents, which is called the COVID-19, a Blueprint for Recovery. And in that, in 8.1, as the Council and the City moves towards recovery, it will be important to consult and engage with a broad range of partners, residents and businesses to ensure that the Council's plans are comprehensive and, really importantly, and that the City feels connected to the recovery. I do hope that you see this as an opportunity to be seen to be doing what you say you'll do. So my question, funnily enough, it's also about the Higham Park tennis courts. The Council's proposed development of 3 hard tennis courts to replace the 10 grass courts at Higham Park was originally conceived in 2017, or before. Much has changed since that proposal was approved, not least people's understanding and appreciation of open access to green spaces in the city. The Council's recently published its environmental strategy and its COVID blueprint for recovery, to which I've already referred. Does the Council believe that the proposed hard courts development is a necessary expenditure and completely aligned with its own latest strategic guidelines and principles?
Thank you, Mr. Mullen.
Thank you.
Councillor Packer, would you please reply?
Thank you for your question, Mr. Mullen. The corporate priorities which the project aims to deliver do remain relevant. Under the priority People Living Well, the provision of affordable tennis is aimed at reducing inequalities in the city by addressing social and financial exclusion, by delivering affordable access to high-quality facilities at just £35 per household per year. The grass courts at Higham Park offered minimal biodiversity. The project will deliver new facilities that allow access to a larger area of the park for the public and provide an opportunity to increase biodiversity. Our proposals for this area will be developed in consultation with the park's users. The project at Higham Park will deliver the Environmental Strategies Action Plan commitments to investigate the potential for managing some intensively managed grass areas involving fewer cuts per year, and continue to involve local communities in the management of their local parks, natural areas and open spaces.
Thank you, Councillor Packer. Mr. Mullen, you're allowed 1 supplementary question. Do you have a supplementary question? You have a minute in which to ask it.
Okay. I do have a supplementary question. Thank you for your answer, by the way. I think one could play tennis with those things all day long about who's got a view on what aligns to what. But my supplementary question goes like this. So regarding the proposed expenditure to which I referred in my first question, it's my understanding from council documents that the projected costs are somewhere in the region of £260,000. Yet a recent Freedom of Information request has been met with a response that there is no detailed breakdown of costs available. And I'm going to quote from the response. In reviewing your request, I've made inquiries as to whether or not any fuller breakdown of the procurement figures is held by the Council. I can confirm that no such breakdown is or ever has been held by the Council or our subcontractors. It sounds strange and unprofessional for such a significant expenditure in these times, and I wonder what the confidence is in this figure and whether it truly reflects all of the internal Council costs of the creation, administration and consultation for the original 2017 application and the approved 2018 one. That's a question to me, not to you. Since those times, we know that inflation and pandemic impacts on building materials, costs and labour can only have increased this sum further. So my question is this. Is there a revised cost in which there can be confidence and, notwithstanding all of this, why does it make sense to spend so much money on reducing the number of tennis courts in Higham Park from 10 to 3?
Thank you, Mr. Mullen, and thank you for doing it in the time that you did. Councillor Packer, would you please give a reply?
So for the first question, I would like to state that I have full confidence in the information that the officers have worked on and provided us with in terms of the costing. On your second question, what I would say is where there were grass courts which were available for several months per year, there will be new all-weather courts available year-round for longer hours of the day. So I feel that it will increase accessibility and actual take-up and usage of those courts.
Thank you, Councillor. Thank you, Councillor Packer. Mr. Mullen, you similarly are welcome to stay, or you can sit and listen to the rest of the meeting.
Can I just ask,
No, you can't. No,
get...
please step back. Mr. Mullen, please step back. Thank you. Next item on the agenda, petitions. There are no petitions received for this meeting, so we'll move on to the minutes. The minutes are present in the bundle, and I call upon Councillor Waters to move the minutes of the meeting held on the 16th of March 2021 and the 24th of May 2021.
For two short words, formally moved.
Thank you, Councillor Waters. I call upon Councillor Bogeline to second the minutes.
I can formally second the one that I was present for, but I was not there at the full council meeting.
Okay.
So we might have to hand that to Martin or Ben.
Or Councillor Wright to your left.
Formally seconded, Lord Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you. We will now move to the vote. And remember, we go in this new reverse order because of the ease. So all those against accepting the minutes? All those who will abstain from that? All people voting in favour of the minutes being a true record? Thank you so much. Anonymous. Unanimous. Anonymous. Pardon? I do apologise. We have one abstention. Thank you. Okay. So the next item are questions to Cabinet members in the chairs of committees. There are 16 questions from members of the Council to Cabinet members, of which notice has been given in accordance within the provisions of Appendix 1 of our wonderful new Constitution. A copy will be available on the Council's website. Members who have asked questions are permitted to put a supplementary question to the Cabinet member, but in order to make the proceedings more fluid and help to move the business along, I'd be grateful if right now those members who are considering asking a supplementary question, please raise your hand so that we can plan where to take the roving microphones. Thank you. Councillor Bogeline, would you please give me your supplementary question? Thanks.
Yes, thank you. Could you confirm, please, that the action plan will cover all council services, including the services provided by NCSL to the council, as well as services provided by NCSL to other clients, and that therefore the action plan will be reflected in the forthcoming NCSL business plan?
Can we have an answer to that? Okay, thanks. Councillor Packer.
Thank you, Councillor Bogeline. Yes, I believe it does. If for any reason I'm incorrect, I shall let you know. But thank you for your question.
Okay, we'll move. Councillor Galvin, you have a supplementary question. Would you like to give your supplementary question to Councillor Kendrick?
Do you honestly think it's right that members of the public can't see the papers if they want to ask a question in order to ask a timely question based on seeing the report?
Councillor Kendrick.
Thank you, Councillor Gowen. Well, firstly, of course, members of the public will have the opportunity to ask a supplementary question on the night, so they will be able to answer questions relating to the papers before them. But I have to say that I have to remind members that the Green Party were members of the Constitutional Working Party that agreed these rules and regulations. It rather does remind me of Boris Johnson and Lord Frost over the Northern Ireland Protocol, where one moment they said, oh, this is a great deal, we entirely agree with it, and then a few months later says, oh, I'd never had any idea that this would happen. So no, I think at the end of the day we agreed to a set of new regulations within the Constitution, and we should stick to them and see how they go. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Question 9 is from Councillor Youssef. Councillor Youssef, do you have, well, I know you do, have a supplementary question?
Thank you, Councillor Packer, for your response. However, responses from officers say that while initial contact was made with the Pesticides Action Network over 2 years ago, they have been unable to make any progress. Will Councillor Packer tell us when the audit on existing pesticides was conducted and when he will present its findings?
Thank you. And that's Councillor Packer.
Thank you, Councillor Youssef. Let me get into that, check the details, and I'll get back to you.
Thank you. Councillor Schmierer, or the councillor with no name, would you like to ask your supplementary question?
Yeah, thank you very much, and thank you very much to Councillor Waters for your response. We have heard a lot in the national news about what is known as pork barrel politics, namely that process of funneling government spending by the ruling party into particular areas based on particular considerations and political considerations at the expense of broader public interests. I know it would be wholly incorrect and unfair to compare this administration to the Conservative government at Westminster, but that's why I wanted to allow Councillor Waters the chance to distance himself fundamentally and emphatically from this divisive and detrimental way of doing politics here in Norwich.
Thank you, Councillor Schmierer. Councillor Water, would you like to reply?
Well, Councillor Schmierer, in part of your supplementary question, you said that you would in no way compare the politics of the city with the pork barrel politics of a Conservative administration. So you've answered your own supplementary question.
Thank you. So, Councillor Graham, you have a supplementary. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Councillor Kendrick, for confirming the unhealthy dependence that we have on car park income. In responding to the draft local transport plan, City Council rightly called for a year-on-year reduction of the existing 10,000 cap on car park spaces, the development and reuse of redundant car parks, and enforcement action against unauthorised car parks. So perhaps you can see the conflict between the reliance on car park income and the climate and clean air needs and aspirations of reducing car use. So my question is, how do you plan to navigate that conflict?
Councillor Kendrick.
Perhaps Councillor Graham and the Green Party would much like a healthier situation where we had to make massive cuts in our budgets because we didn't have the income from the car parking. Now, I am someone who actually does use public transport, hence the video prop here, my bus ticket. But there are people like my son, for example, who lives in a village just outside of Great Yarmouth, that when he comes to Norwich has to use his motor transport. There is simply no way that he can use public transport. And we have to cater for them. And the fact that we actually encourage people to use the council's car park, where the profits do not go to some large national company, but are actually here to protect our vital services, is not something that I am ashamed of. And I think we should all be prepared to accept that the car revenue from our car parking income plays an important role in protecting our vital services in this city. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Kendrick. Councillor Carlow, please ask your supplementary question when the mic arrives.
Thank you, Councillor Stannard. I'm trying to speak without reverberation. Councillor Stannard, you say that the Council continues to work closely with all concerned to identify the appropriate next steps in development of Anglia Square. So my question really is, when and how will the Council engage with ward councillors, residents, heritage bodies and other important stakeholders on the future of Anglia Square? And will green open space be included in the mix of uses, please? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Carlo, for the supplementary. I mean, what I would say is really important to remember that we're at a really early stage of considering the future of Anglia Square following the Secretary of State's rather surprising decision to overturn the inspector's decision and the original planning permission. So we also need to be aware, of course, that the landowners are reconsidering and the developers are reconsidering their proposals, and they are engaging themselves with organisations, in particular Historic England, and that can only be to the good if those two organisations are talking and looking to find a solution which is mutually acceptable. I think that's really, really good news. So we're at the stage, and of course in terms of planning policy, governing Anglia Square and how it will be developed, there's a great deal of it in place, as you know, and much of it has a long history. So at the present time, we have Western Homes having conversations with Historic England. We've had a visit from Homes England in Historic England looking at the site and understanding it, and I think being surprised by the state of the site at the moment. So it's good that the national players in this have been and had a look for themselves and have seen the condition of Anglia Square at the moment and why it's such a priority that it gets the issue gets resolved and development takes place. And we also have the developer talking to the principal objector at the time that the planning permission previously was approved. I think that's really, really good news, all of it. Of course, we're at an early stage in the process and we need to let this play out. But of course, when proposals come forward, there will be full consultation and full community engagement because clearly, well, that's what our statement of community involvement says, and that's what we will do. And in terms of green space, of course there'll be green space in the development. And I can't tell you how much or where, but we would expect to see that.
Thank you, Councillor Stannard. Councillor Osborne, you have a supplementary.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Kendrick, for your response. It's pleased to see that considerations will be given to all viable options for investing in renewable energy. However, I remain disappointed that the Council hasn't made much progress on that so far compared to other councils. When you look at what, for example, West Berkshire is doing, Warrington Borough Council, West Sussex, West Suffolk, for some reason it's all the Wests, they are powering ahead with using community municipal investment bonds to invest in solar power, in renewable energy, and delivering those benefits for their communities, as well as meeting carbon reduction targets. So please, can you explain why Norwich is behind those other councils and is lagging behind?
Thank you, Councillor Osborne. Councillor Kendrick?
I would hardly compare the financial situation of this authority with that of West Sussex. But can I just go on further? And I think it's actually stated in the final paragraph. I would actually welcome any...
Sorry, can you get close to your microphone?
Oh, sorry. I would welcome any costed commercial business cases from councillors which would allow for a return on investment, while also providing social and environmental benefits with minimum risk. So, of course, we are prepared to look at any viable business case that Councillor Osborne can actually put forward. I haven't seen any yet.
Thank you, Councillor Kendrick. Councillor Haynes, you have a supplementary, and the mic is coming close to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Kendrick, for your response. As far as I'm aware, residents of a number of estates around the city have asked to be part of this programme. And how can you say there's no need for additional finance when they've been told that finances are the limiting factor behind them not being able to be part? I'm thinking Ebenezer Place, Marpit Lane, I think as well, Langley Walk.
Councillor Kendrick.
Thank you very much for your supplementary question. I think we have to realise that the last financial year was a particularly special year in regards to the COVID crisis. And unfortunately, we weren't able to do as much of the works as we had liked to have done because of that COVID crisis. Now, we have to be honest and say that it will not be necessarily possible for us to do all the works that we would have liked to have done in the last year and this year in the same financial year. There simply wouldn't be the resources able to do so. But I have to say that this is not money that is somehow being lost. It will be invested in the future, and we will continue, obviously, to prioritise those investments. But I can say, as a council tenant, as indeed Councillor Harris is also a council tenant and the Cabinet Member for Housing, that we will continue to strive as much as we can do for our fellow council tenants who receive an excellent service from this local authority. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Kendrick. Councillor Lubbock, do you have a supplementary for Councillor Packer?
Thank you, Councillor Packer, for your response. The Council's slow progress on the implementation of car parking charges in Eaton Park, with completion at the end of the year, suits local residents and Eaton councillors very well, as the charges are very, very unpopular. If the stakeholder consultation reveals a similar negative response, will the Cabinet change their minds on its implementation?
Thank you for your question, Councillor Lubbock. I think to answer it, I would flip it on its head and say, if you can help identify where we'd find that 50k from without introducing this, then I'm more than happy to listen and talk to you about it.
Thank you, Councillor Packer. And thank you all the councillors who've been involved with those questions. We've got through those at a decent pace. The next item, item 6 on the agenda, I call upon Councillor Kendrick to move item 6.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Now, I will try and be as brief as possible on the reports that I am going to introduce, but I would just like to spend a minute or two on saying to this council how glad I am that we are going to appoint Leela Mickleborough as our new monitoring officer for this local authority. I had the pleasure of interviewing her, and she is a first-rate and capable candidate who I'm sure we will look forward to joining this authority. I believe she's joining us on July the 19th. At present, she works for West Suffolk District Council, and if you haven't heard of that, that's the new amalgamation between the former St Edmundbury's Council and Forest Heath Council. So I'm sure as a local authority, we will all, as a local council, we will all wish her the best of luck, and I'm sure that she will be a very great asset to this local authority. So I would very much urge this council to approve this report. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Kendrick. I call upon Councillor Mike Sands to second the item.
I formally second the item and fully endorse Councillor Kendrick's comments. I'd simply like to add that the Office of Monitoring Officer is one of the most important ones in any authority, not least of which is Norwich City Council. We've had some absolutely wonderful monitoring officers in recent years, or all the time I've been a councillor. I'm absolutely certain that Leah Mickleborough will be a total asset to the council. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Sands. Councillor Osborne, would you like to speak on behalf of the Green?
Yes, echoing Councillor Kendrick's and Councillor Sands' comments, I know that the role of the monitoring officer is very important, and that the recruitment process for this role has been very rigorous, and so congratulations to the appointee. the appointment of a member of the senior leadership team to this post will ensure that the holder has valuable knowledge regarding the workings of the council and ensure that advice can be given on complex issues of the council's work. At the same time, the monitoring officer's independence from the council's leadership team is to be highly valued. That independence is vital in order to provide a disinterested source of advice for councillors and a point of contact for complaints. It's also worth noticing that the council has recently undertaken a review of its procurement strategy, and the monitoring officer's role in this council is combined with the head of service role for procurement. There's potential significant changes to procurement frameworks, including as a result of Brexit, coming forward to this council, and therefore there's a large responsibility for the new monitoring officer to oversee those updates to the council's procurement policy, and crucially that needs to include increased social value and a focus on meeting environmental standards. So overall, the Green Party councillors will of course be supporting this appointment while stressing the importance of the responsibilities I have just mentioned. We look forward to working with Leah and congratulate her on her appointment.
Thank you, Councillor Osborne. Councillor Wright for the Lib Dems, would you like to speak?
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Picking up on the points that councillors who've spoken before me have already raised, and as someone who was part of the robust recruitment process that resulted in Leah's appointment, I have absolutely no doubt that she will be an absolutely outstanding monitoring officer and have no hesitation in endorsing this item this evening. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Other councillors who indicate? Councillor Kendrick, would you like to respond?
Nothing further to add, Lord Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Kendrick. We will now move to a vote, and again in that reverse order. All those against the appointment of the monitoring officer? All those who wish to abstain on this matter? And all those in favour? It is unanimous. The previous one I should have said was nemine contendit. Item 7, appointment to outside bodies. Would you please note that there has been an amended appendix to this report. It has been circulated and it has been published on the council website. I call upon Councillor Kendrick to move item 7.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Again, I shall try and be brief. Thank you very much for actually reminding members that we have an amended list of appointments. Obviously, that those appointments will be amended still further during the course of this year. But can I firstly thank all those people who have served as Norwich City Council representatives on the outside bodies over the last year for the excellent work they have done in representing this local authority. And can I wish all the future representatives the best of luck for the coming municipal year. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Kendrick. I call upon Councillor Waters to second the item.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Formally second, but reserve the right to speak.
Thank you. Councillor Bogeline, as spokesperson for the Greens, would you like to speak?
Thank you, Lord Mayor. So I think this report includes a very positive development for this council, establishing shareholder panels for both our wholly owned companies, NCSL and NRL. These shareholder panels will add an important element of scrutiny and overview, and this is a very positive step in line with the overall improvements of governance structures for these companies. It's really encouraging for us to see that a Green councillor has a seat on both of these stakeholder panels, and it will strengthen the panels considerably as a critical friend. I think going forward it would be good to consider whether there is a possibility to include a representative from the Liberal Democrat group as well. And there's another slight caveat to this. I would have hoped that we could appoint a Green nominee rather than having to send the group leader. As a group, we work on the basis of knowledge and expertise, which we think is a more effective way of working in a political environment as opposed to, for example, a strong leadership model. I would like to pick up on the theme of knowledge and expertise by suggesting, I wanted to suggest a number of Green councillors for some of the appointments that are currently not filled. I had some discussions with Councillor Waters, and I'm glad to hear that the council representative on the Access Group will intend to work with Councillor Graham, who has been very active in championing accessibility. One of the vacancies that I think the Green Group can provide the ideal candidate for is the Greater Norwich Development Partnership, where there are currently 2 vacancies. Councillor Carlo has an incredible wealth of knowledge about the GNDP and an evidence-based and strategic approach towards the development of the Greater Norwich area. Over the years, she has responded to every consultation of development plans and is fully familiar with current proposals. She would be able to provide a level of knowledge and scrutiny on the environmental impact of proposals that would be an important and beneficial voice on the partnership. So I believe appointing her to this outside body would strengthen Norwich City Council's representation. I would generally also like to wish all representatives a successful year, and we would appreciate reports back from these meetings to relevant shadow portfolio holders so we can work together on this.
Thank you, Councillor Boglein. Councillor Wright, as spokesperson for the Lib Dems, would you like to say something?
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I just have a few quick points on the nominations before us. Firstly, it's good to see new councillors taking up posts with outside bodies, and also to see councillors in roles where they have areas of expertise. I would also like to add my thanks to those who have undertaken their various roles during the last year. I note that there are some non-councillors who are appointed to a range of outside bodies. Maybe in the future, it would be appropriate to seek other talents from within our community to lighten the load of those with multiple appointments. Moving on to the appointments to the NCSL and NRL shareholder boards. As the members of this board are there to represent council as a shareholder, can I please get an understanding as to what the reporting back mechanism to full council is? For the Norfolk Countywide Community Safety Partnership Scrutiny Subpanel and the Norfolk Health Scrutiny Overview and Scrutiny Committee, reporting back is via an agenda item at the scrutiny meeting. So I think that a similar approach to full council would be in order for these shareholder panels. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wright. Now, I believe Councillor Waters wished to exercise that right to speak.
Thank you very much, Lord Mayor. And just to pick up one or two particular points mentioned by Councillor Bergeline, particularly in relation to her suggestion that Councillor Carlo join the Greater Norwich board. I'm at one with Councillor Bergeline about the expertise and knowledge and thorough preparation that Councillor Carlo brings to those areas that she's interested in, and Greater Norwich has certainly been one of those, and she's asked public questions at some of the board meetings in the past. But I think to perhaps provide reassurance about that expertise being given, as it were, full rein, the structure of the partnership is three councils and the county council and the local enterprise partnership. The councils are represented by members of their administrations, and so reflect the political leadership of those councils. But any decision that partnership makes, and each council has a veto, so we have to come to a consensus. And when we do come to a consensus, as we have done with the local plan proposals going forward, these have to come back for ratification by the individual councils. So the opportunities to test, to question, to offer alternatives are fully built into the decisions made by the partnership when they come back to their councils for ratification. So I think there is every opportunity for Councillor Carlo to be able to offer her expertise and her knowledge at the point where decisions are being made.
Thank you, Councillor Waters. I will now go back to Councillor Kendrick, who... Oh, sorry. I do apologise, yes. Any other councillors who indicate? I now go back to Councillor Kendrick, if you'd like to respond.
First of all, I welcome the support of the leader of the Green Party for the new stakeholder panel. Obviously, I'm sure I will discuss with the leader of suggestions as to the representative of the Green Party. As to the points Councillor Wright has made, well, first of all, of course, it will be subject to the overview of the Scrutiny Committee. Secondly, of course, the papers and the minutes will be available to all members to actually see what the recommendations of that shareholder party is. So it will be an open document that will be available for all local members and councillors.
Thank you, Councillor Kendrick. So now I'll take us to the motion and ask, in that reverse order, all those who are against the motion. All those who wish to abstain from the motion. No. And all those in favour of the motion? Thank you. So another unanimous. Item 8 is the annual report of the Scrutiny Committee, and I call upon Councillor Wright to move item 8.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I would like to begin by thanking all of those who have been involved with the scrutiny process during this unprecedented year, particularly those officers and councillors who have subsequently left the council. The committee members and officers rose well to the challenges of conducting our meetings during the pandemic, making use of technology and new ways of working to allow the committee to continue its work. The broadcast of meetings via YouTube gave members of the public an opportunity to watch our proceedings at a time and place that suited them, and also allowed the committee to invite expert speakers to give evidence without having to give consideration to transport constraints. Much of the work undertaken by the committee this year was framed in the context of COVID-19, with the committee providing scrutiny for the COVID-19 recovery report, a report into enhancing community development following COVID-19, the citizen participation blueprint, and maximising opportunities to achieve zero rough sleeping following COVID-19. We were indebted to Matt Downey from Crisis and Caroline Allywell, formerly of Shelter and the CAB, who were able to join us remotely to provide their insight and answer questions on the zero rough sleeping item. In fact, Caroline was down the line from Brussels, something that would now not be possible. The Local Enterprise Partnership had been due to meet with us in March 2020, and we were delighted that Chris Starkey and Lisa Roberts were finally able to join us at the September meeting to answer questions about the work of the LEP. Councillor Waters was also in attendance to comment from his perspective. Groups of councillors also serve on select committees outside of the main scrutiny meeting, and the findings of the growth of short-term lettings of homes report was presented to the committee in September. It had been hoped to gain comment on this piece of work from both of the city's MPs, but sadly neither was able to provide any reply to my requests. Throughout the year, the committee has looked at various standing items that fed into the transformation and budget setting process, with members making recommendations to Cabinet that help shape and strengthen the work of the Council. The new scrutiny tracker has been helpful in keeping track of the outcomes of recommendations by the committee. This is particularly useful in keeping track of which recommendations are positively adopted by Cabinet. I commend this review and hope that members feel able to adopt it this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wright. I now call upon Councillor Matthew Fulton McAllister to second the item.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. First of all, I formally second this item. I think that I want to begin by paying my gratitude to our former Vice Chair, Roger Ryan, who was a ward colleague of mine. He's stepped down at the last election, having served a year beyond what he was expecting to do, and in that time still made a valuable contribution as Vice Chair of Scrutiny and supporting our efforts. Moving forwards, we have chosen to keep the scrutiny agenda a bit more fluid this year in light of the situation we are currently in with regard to coronavirus. However, we have put on the first meeting bookings 2 topics which have been recommendations by members of the public, and hopefully that shows that we are looking to take our inspiration from the public as well as our political agendas, but some slightly more political motions will be scrutinised later in the year.
Thank you. Councillor Fulton McAllister. I now invite the group spokespersons to speak. Councillor Osborne for the Green Party.
Yes, thank you to the Chair and to Councillor Fulton McAllister. And I would like to echo the thanks of the Chair to officers and members of Scrutiny for their work throughout the last year. As Councillor Wright said, it was an unprecedented year. And the Scrutiny Committee did consider some important topics, including, not least, the impact of the COVID pandemic on the Council services and the ongoing homelessness crisis. The Scrutiny Committee also raised some important questions around the climate emergency, in particular in questioning the New Anglia Local Enterprise Partnership. After detailed questioning on the Local Enterprise Partnership's Clean Growth Task Force, the representatives from the LEP had to admit that they had not done as much as they would like on addressing the climate emergency. And I'm pleased to see now that the Local Enterprise Partnership has restarted its Clean Growth Task Force, which was one of the recommendations of the Scrutiny Committee, of course, via Cabinet. However, it does remain disappointing that the Cabinet seemingly gives scant consideration to many of the Committee's recommendations. An example was the report from the Scrutiny Task and Finish Group on short-term lets, which I know that councillors put a lot of work into. They had put a lot of work into it, particularly because it was a topic requested for consideration directly by a member of the public. The Cabinet, so far as I know, did nothing with the detailed report by the cross-party group of councillors who wrote it. Similarly, in response to the recommendations of the Committee on the COVID Recovery Blueprint, which included recommendations such as, and I quote, revising the commercial property investment strategy to reflect the changes in the economy due to COVID-19 and how this could drive a green economy, the Cabinet simply noted the recommendations without, so far as I am aware, any further investigation. The Scrutiny Committee exists to add value to the Council's work. It is not party political, and the recommendations that come from it should be the result of detailed questioning and considerations from councillors of all parties. I therefore hope that in future Cabinet will give better consideration to the Scrutiny recommendations. Even if Cabinet decides not to adopt the recommendations, which is, after all, in their prerogative, please at least give some evidence of how you have considered them in more detail than has hitherto been the case. Finally, I want to also raise my disappointment and my deep frustration that the Scrutiny Committee voted in October to postpone a Task and Finish group investigating the topic of fly tipping. As Councillor Fulton McAllister said, this was now raised in the most recent meeting, but this was first raised by a member of the public right back in May 2019. We know that from various debates in this council chamber that fly tipping is an issue that directly affects residents' daily lives and is one of the main issues that residents raise with myself as a ward councillor. I really could not believe it when councillors on the Scrutiny Committee said that they didn't have time to consider this topic.
Osborne, could you begin to wrap up? Okay,
I'll wrap up. I mean, you can understand my frustration that when a member of the public asks for something to be considered and the Scrutiny Committee councillors say they don't have time to consider it. So I hope that there will be improvements. I do have high hopes for scrutiny in the coming year, and the most recent meeting got off to a good start, and I'm looking forward to it in the future.
Thank you, Councillor Osborne. Other councillors who wish to speak? Councillor Waters.
As the telling phrase has it, I wasn't going to speak, but I can't let a mischaracterisation of the role of the Cabinet in the work of the Scrutiny Committee be allowed to pass without comment. Cabinet members are actively involved with the Scrutiny Committee at the invitation of the Scrutiny Committee to be there to answer questions, make comments. Councillor Wright was kind enough to refer to my presence at the meeting where the work of the LEP was being discussed. And Councillor Osborne does not attend all of the Cabinet meetings where we consider scrutiny recommendations. And many of those recommendations are valuable recommendations which we are happy to accept. I would finally say that we did some work on the Constitution, and the Constitution embodies the idea of a non-partisan approach to its work. That is different from the issue of how you prioritise particular issues, and sometimes speaking about a member of the public being interested in a particular topic. Well, it's pretty good to give a member of the public consideration in looking at priorities, but it doesn't necessarily mean that those priorities fit in with the work of the work of the Scrutiny Committee. It is a cross-party body, and it makes its decisions about how it uses its time most effectively. So I think it's a rather sour set of remarks given the neutral and constructive way in which the chair of the Scrutiny Committee presented his report today.
Thank you, Councillor Waters. Any other councillor wish to speak? I will ask Councillor Wright to respond.
Thank you, Lord Mayor, and thank you to those councillors who've spoken on this item. I think it's. I'd like to actually thank Councillor Fulton McAllister. We had an unplanned double act, I think, insofar as I looked back and he looked forwards. And I think picking up on Councillor Osborne's point about the fly tipping, I'm confident that this year we will actually have some very detailed scrutiny looking at the issue of bins and fly tipping. So hopefully this time next year we'll have some satisfaction on that. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wright. We will now move to a vote. All those against accepting the report from Scrutiny Committee? All those who wish to abstain? All those in favour? Thank you, that's unanimous. And we're making good time. We're now going to move to item 9, which are the motions, and we have a number of motions to consider, starting with 9A, a motion on advertising. An amendment to motion 9A has been received from Councillor Waters, which has been circulated. Councillor Schmierer has indicated that he's willing to accept this amendment. If no other members object, the amendment will become part of the substantive motion. As no member has objected, that is agreed. I therefore call upon Councillor Schmierer to move motion 9A as amended.
Thank you very much, Lord Mayor, for allowing me to move this motion, which we had originally planned to bring to Marches for Council, but we didn't have time to debate it then, so I'm really glad that this is the first motion on the agenda tonight. And I think it is an important one because it seeks to make Norwich City Council a more ethical local authority and Norwich as a city a more pleasant place to live. This item, which looks to build on a motion put forward by the former councillor Simeon Jackson, my former colleague, who put it forward in September 2013, and in so doing proposed that Norwich City Council would not allow its assets or its facilities to be used for advertising payday loan companies. This motion was carried almost a decade ago, and I think we can all agree that payday loans, though, are not the only social ill that this council should distance itself from. This motion, therefore, looks to draw on the work by Ad Free Cities and Adblock Norwich in seeking to reduce the exposure of our citizens to the adverts promoting junk food, alcohol, gambling, and the most environmentally damaging products. Sadly, advertising is ubiquitous within our lives. When we turn on our phones to when we go for a walk or a run around the city, it always seems to be on display. Products that are being advertised include ones that are either damaging to our own health or that of the planet, or indeed the wider community, and therefore lawmakers and politicians need to have a serious look into how much of that we permit. We here in the Green Party group would like Norwich to step up and commit itself to doing what it can to make such harmful adverts a thing of the past. Now, I know I don't need to remind councillors that the primary duty of any government, whether that be local, national, or even international, is to protect the welfare of its citizens. Protecting them from exposure to advertisements for the most harmful services, companies, or products is simply part of that duty. What is really reassuring to me is that we have seen that several local authorities are already taking action here, and even the national government, who I very rarely have anything positive to say for, are undertaking a review of gambling advertising in sport. As someone who loves to watch football, sometimes when it goes well, other times not so much, it always disappoints me, however, that we see so many gambling companies being advertised in stadia across this country. Stadia are meant to be places that are family friendly. And I am pleased, though, to see that there has been a growing popular pressure being put on the government and football authorities to remove gambling advertising in the sport. Currently, 2/3 of teams in the Championship, for example, have shirts sponsored by gambling companies. And only 3 teams in the top flight are believed to have no links whatsoever with the gambling industry. For me, what is especially concerning is the amount of advertising that is either directed at children or in places where children gather. And one of those is, of course, football stadium. However, things are changing. Here in Norwich, we have seen exactly what can happen when fans and those in positions of power, including the local media, can call for a change in approach to sponsorship. I was absolutely delighted when Norwich City listened to its fans and decided to end what turned out to be an extremely ephemeral partnership with the Asian betting company BK8 only a few weeks ago. Elsewhere, in Italy, the government has made good on its promise to ban betting sites from advertising on television, radio, and online in April 2019. Their view, as probably would be the case here, resonated with an Italian public that felt swamped by a steady stream of adverts for online casinos and sportsbooks. And so when I visited Milan in December 2019 and watched an absolute yawn-a-thon of a goalless draw between Inter Milan and Roma, I was, however, struck and pleased by the fact that it was Italian pasta sauces that were being advertised rather than gambling companies, something that I thought made a very nice change compared to what is seemingly ubiquitously on display in British stadiums. Of course, the gambling industry is, I suppose, just the latest vice du jour, which is having its exposure limited, and rightly so. There is a strong precedent for such action. Most forms of tobacco advertising and sponsorship were banned from 2003, for example, on billboards and in printed publications, while tobacco sponsorship of international sport was banned from 2005. On a more local level, there is also now a good historical precedent for limiting the advertising of products referred to in this motion, since the Mayor of London brought forward a programme of banning junk food advertising 2 years ago, with 4 local authorities successfully having implemented such a policy, including Haringey, Merton and Southwark, and most recently Bristol, which became the first city outside of London. In terms of Bristol, earlier this year, the council there introduced a new advertising and sponsorship policy restricting advertising for junk food, gambling, payday loans and alcohol. Bristol Council has indicated a willingness also to consult on further proposals for exclusions of advertising for high carbon products such as SUVs, airlines and fossil fuel companies. This is exactly the direction I would like other authorities to travel in, and Norwich can lead that process. So back to Norwich. What could and should we as a council do to help on this journey? Well, we directly do sell advertising space in publications such as the Citizen magazine, and there are so-called out-of-home advertisements placed in and around council-owned premises such as car parks. It would be good tonight to get a commitment that these could not be used to promote harmful products to public health or to the environment. We should also prevent any advertising billboards being placed near schools or other areas which are designed specifically for young people. However, most importantly, this council can act as a strong vector for change. Passing this motion tonight would send a powerful, powerful message to the big employers and organisations in this city and elsewhere that Norwich is indeed an ethical city and takes its responsibility in this regard incredibly seriously. That is why I would urge you to support this motion tonight.
Thank you, Councillor Schmierer, and thank you for your timing of your speech. I call upon Councillor Osborne to second the item.
Thank you, Lord Mayor, and thank you to Councillor Schmierer for that speech. In 2014, the United Nations Special Rapporteur on Cultural Rights presented a report on the impact of advertising on cultural and public life. The report concluded that governments should protect people from undue levels of commercial advertising and marketing while increasing the space for not-for-profit expressions. That's a direct quote from the report. And within the framework of Article 19 of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, the Special Rapporteur recommended that governments should regulate the area more effectively. Since that time, a number of cities around the world have, including Geneva, Grenoble, Sao Paulo, Milan, as I think Martin mentioned, have sought to restrict the pollution of public and cultural space by commercial advertising. In the UK, there have been only a very few cities, as well as the London boroughs, who have followed this example. So passing this motion in Norwich would actually make our city a pioneer in the reclaiming of public space and setting a standard for how we wish our public space to be used and what messages we want to present to the residents and visitors of this city. I want to bring in a bit of theory here about the rights of the city. This motion is not about stopping the use of public space or impinging on any particular rights, but it's about looking at who has the right to use our public space and how. Recently in Norwich, we've seen activity from activists who have been reclaiming billboards for public art and raising thought-provoking questions about what messages we put in those billboards and what messages we provide to children, to transport users, and to other members of the public. And such use of public space follows in the spirit of Henri Lefebvre's right to the city. In this sense, that motion can be seen as promoting a responsible and active public life. That's the theory. But on a more immediate level, we have to stress that advertising restrictions can be really effective. The example of tobacco advertising and the ban on tobacco public advertising is very pertinent. And that's why the inclusion in this motion of reducing advertising on carbon-intensive products is so important, because if we want to address the climate emergency, we have to start reducing the way that we consume and particularly those high carbon lifestyles. And that's why restricting advertising on those products is in line with the Council's ambitions on the climate emergencies and would put us well ahead of many other councils. And so I hope that this motion will pass and that the Cabinet and the Council will continue to act on it, and that I look forward to seeing a better city in the future. And thank you to Ad Free Cities and the many campaigners who've helped and put forward this campaign, pushed on this campaign.
Thank you, Councillor Osborne. And 4 seconds to spare. Well done. I'm going to invite the group spokespersons to speak. Councillor Waters for the Labour Party.
Thank you very much, Lord Mayor. So the resolution, first resolution of this motion is to ask the Cabinet to look at this range of issues in this motion to Council. And I think that's a very helpful thing to do. And I think it's about at what level, at what tier, where we can get the most traction, we can have the best effect. So if for example, I take recommendation 2 to review and update the Council's planning policy to ensure within legal restrictions, and that was one of our amendments, new advertising hoardings cannot be installed within the proximity of schools. The only condition that we can act on, or frankly the Highways Authority, which is the County Council, can act on, is around highway safety. There is no power, as currently stated, where we can, or the County Council could take a view about what is being advertised and make a decision on that basis. So there are some issues that we really need to scope out to understand where we have the powers and what opportunities exist to influence this agenda. I read through the Bristol document, which I thought was very good. What it did point out was the importance and the power of the Advertising Standards Agency, which I think is a body which would be worth seeking to directly influence or make the views of this council and people in Norwich known to them in terms of them shifting the agenda. Because as the motion says, there have been decisions made by national government to deal with some forms of advertising, and smoking and tobacco is one of the most significant achievements in that area. We clearly have power over our multi-storey car park and advertising. We also have power in terms of some of the bus stop advertising as well, and there are clauses in the provisions about what we will accept and what we won't accept. So we have some latitude in that respect, and clearly embedded in our equality and diversity strategies are very significant preferences for making sure that we have strong ethical advertising. There are clearly opportunities to talk to the football club, some of the key institutions in the city, but I do think that what we need to understand is precisely where we can have the most impact, and some of that may be at national government level, and that's stated in clause 4. So what we'll do is we'll take this away, we'll have a look at some of the examples from some of the other local authorities that have been stated. We will look at our powers as a, sadly, second-tier authority, some of the references to London government and some of the other references to big unitary authorities may be a factor in what they're able to do. And then we will bring a report back to Cabinet to respond to this motion should we pass it this evening.
Thank you, Councillor Waters. Councillor Lubbock, would you like to speak on behalf of the Lib Dems?
Thank you, Lord Mayor. As a council, we have a duty of care, especially to children and young adults who are extremely impressionable, and therefore prey to junk food, gambling, and other potentially harmful advertisements. Why else would such large amounts of money be spent on advertising? It is at this young age that habits are formed and bad habits are difficult to break. So why would we want to allow the promotion of potentially harmful advertising? To see more youngsters obese, struggling to play sports, to enjoy their childhood, perhaps even bullied at school as a consequence. To see young adults betting on sports with money that is not theirs and consuming quantities of alcohol affecting their behaviour. Is it because there is no leadership from the government showing us what we should be doing and how we should do it? Or is it because this is not an easy policy to devise, especially deciding what advertisements are harmful? In the banning of tobacco advertising, a precedent was set many years ago. But when it comes to junk food and other harmful products, the government are cautious with their approach. COVID has exacerbated childhood obesity, so now more than ever, a hard line should be taken. But that is not the government's stance. When just last week it decided to ban junk food ads before the TV watershed and online, loopholes remain, allowing big brands to advertise during the day as long as they don't show any unhealthy products, and small businesses are exempt altogether. Although I have talked about junk food advertising, watching the football this evening, I was reminded of the big betting sponsors who have become a familiar household name for Norwich City supporters. We've seen that where big money deals are involved, thorough investigation of the product being advertised and the long-term effects of that sponsorship seem to get little consideration. It's all about the money. With a government that cares more about business profits than the welfare of young people, it is left to district councils to find a way through the minefield of formulating an advertising strategy which really does make a positive contribution to tackling these big issues of obesity, alcoholism, gambling addiction and conservation of the environment. It's good to hear the encouraging words from Councillor Waters that a report will be brought back to Cabinet. I think the Liberal Democrats do very much welcome the proposals contained in this motion as a first step to protecting vulnerable people in our community from harmful advertising in the control of the City Council. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lubbock. Are there any other councillors who wish to speak? Councillor Schmierer, would you like to respond?
Yes, thank you very much, Lord Mayor, and I'd like to thank Councillors Waters, Osborne and Lubbock for their comments on this particular item. I'd also like to remind members that this motion, even if it is passed today, will not simply end the proliferation of these kind of adverts that are, as we have heard, so harmful to our citizens. That is because, obviously, as we have also heard, a lot of the responsibility doesn't lie with district councils, but instead lies with national governments or even international regulations. But, and I stress this, it will be an important step in the right direction. So I do sincerely look forward to seeing the Cabinet's report and their developed and enhanced advertising strategy with all the caveats that Councillor Waters has outlined. But I am confident that with the right political will, we can ensure that together we move towards that goal that I know we all share, namely to make Norwich a more ethical city. And I sincerely believe that passing this motion tonight will be a step in the right direction. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Schmierer. We will now move to the vote. All those against the motion? Anybody wish to abstain from the motion? All those in favour? I just realised. So that's unanimous. Thank you very much. We're now moving to motion 9B, the right to food. I call upon Councillor Huntley to move motion 9B.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. In 2016, appearing on Question Time, the film director Ken Loach asked then Business Secretary Greg Clark, how can we live in a society where hunger is used as a weapon? It isn't a rhetorical question. It's a question that affects too many people in the UK today. And it's a question that recognises this isn't occurring through happenstance. We've seen the deliberate political choice of austerity facing people with having to make decisions between food or fuel, or people in employment, including nurses and care workers, having to make use of food banks. The shameful fact of people having to go hungry in the 5th wealthiest economy in the world has been highlighted by this council before. That is why this motion seeks to ensure that the fundamental right to food is enshrined in law, and the government, charged with these obligations, can be held to account when this right is violated. The National Food Strategy will make recommendations towards a government white paper in parts 1 and 2 of its report. This motion seeks to endorse some of the recommendations made in part 1 and calls for bolder, radical proposals to be made, including the right to food. Austerity was always a choice. The money is there. Over the course of the past year, in excess of 1,000 central government procurement contracts have been made public, and billions of pounds have been directed to firms connected to the Tory party. Companies awarded contracts for unusable products with no experience or weeks from being established. These companies have all profited, and profited enormously. In the face of that wealth, where people go hungry when they simply cannot afford to eat, we can only identify a systemic inequality. This inequality must be challenged. And this motion aligns Norwich City Council with other authorities which seize the initiative in addressing that inequality. I hope all members here tonight will support this motion and de-weaponise hunger.
Thank you, Councillor Huntley. I call upon Councillor Davis to second the item.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I believe the best wealth of a city is in the health of its citizens. I shall always be in favour of feeding children who are in want. These are not my words, but the election address from 1913 of former Town Close councillor Mabel Clarkson. In 1931, in her role as Lord Mayor, Mabel Clarkson opened the Milecross Library. In the same decade, Milecross Hall, now the Phoenix Centre, opened. Today, around 150 people a week go through their doors to access their food bank. What would Norwich's first woman councillor make of this over 100 years later? What would she make of the 4.3 million children growing up in poverty across the UK? What would she make of the 34% of children in Norwich living in poverty? This government talks of levelling up and social mobility, but they cannot ensure the basic needs of children are met. I hope this motion will pass unanimously tonight, and I hope you will all join me in imploring Boris Johnson and his merry bunch of adulterers to stop thinking about their own base needs and start thinking about children's basic needs, and be more Mabel. Lord Mayor, I second this motion.
Thank you, Councillor Davis. I now call upon the group spokespersons to speak. Councillor Haynes for the Greens.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. This is an important motion, and I think tackling a really timely issue with the impact of the pandemic on people's personal finances. 8.4 million people in the UK are currently living in food poverty, with disabled people and older people disproportionately affected. And in September 2020, a survey was done that said 14% of adults with children at home experienced moderate or severe food insecurity in the previous 6 months. That's since the start of the coronavirus restrictions. So this is a really significant issue for our residents in Norwich. Because the right to food is such a basic right, you shouldn't have to make choices between heating and eating or paying rent and eating. You shouldn't have to limit what they eat so that others in your family can eat. And it's a bad sign, isn't it, when the government has to be forced into providing food to children based on pressures from sports stars after the terrible hamper provision that they made for children self-isolating from school. And that's not a criticism of schools. I know my children's school made massive efforts to ensure children were fed even in lockdown. It's the fault of the government who wanted to hand contracts to their mates rather than actually organise feeding children properly. So I completely agree about extending the eligibility. The threshold for getting free school meals is really low, and although I think the entitlement follows the child for a while, to the end of the educational phase they're in, there are still many children out there that could absolutely benefit from entitlement to free school meals. And something I think it's worth saying on recommendation 1B is that accessibility isn't just about the digital exclusion, not being able to sign up for the scheme, but about physical barriers. I was shocked to learn when I got my free school meal vouchers that you can't spend them online at most supermarkets. Lower income families are more likely to not to be able to afford to have access to a car. Booking a delivery slot for shopping has been difficult enough at times without being limited on where you can shop online with your vouchers. And that's before you mention the impact of isolating, including on single-parent families, just to plug a motion from later on. Well, if one of my kids is off school and can't leave the house, I can't be off round the supermarket if you have to isolate yourself, can you? It's just not possible. You need to be able to spend those vouchers online and get a delivery booked. I'm also really supportive of anything that improves access to locally produced food. Not only will initiatives like that help tackle food poverty, but getting people out and active on shared allotment projects and similar will really help with mental health, something else that's been massively impacted by the events of the last year and a bit. Well managed, these projects are also fabulous for the environment and for people's awareness of where food comes from. It'd be great if we could find projects like this that already exist in Norwich and show them our support. And the same goes for current projects working on bringing out-of-date food to the community. I think a thanks is due to any community groups and individuals who've encouraged shops to donate their food, as well as to the shops that are doing it. And I really hope that more shops can follow on and start donating their out-of-date food. Thank you for putting this motion tonight. The Green Group will be supporting it.
Thank you, Councillor Haynes. And I call upon Councillor Ackroyd to speak for the Liberal Democrats.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Yesterday, a charity of which I'm a trustee received a request for a grant from a school in the north of the city, described by the TA who sent it in as having a catchment area characterised by high levels of deprivation. They plan to run a holiday club, providing food and activities to pupils and families, including day trips to the beach, as some of the children have never been there. Recent surveys have found that over 9,000 children in Norwich were living in poverty in the year up to the end of March 2020, with families having to make the choice between food and utilities, whilst the pandemic is making the situation worse, further lowering incomes. It is unacceptable that in 2021, in one of the most prosperous nations in the world, people are going hungry. The UK's food poverty rate is among the highest in Europe, with the Trussell Trust reporting a huge increase in the number of vouchers issued to families at the start of lockdown compared with the previous year. This is the result of, for example, increasing food and house prices, insecure incomes, rising debt, benefit sanctions, dare I say it, and financial problems for households dealing with disability and mental health. But it also shows something else, that the human right to food is far from a reality for too many people in our country. The UK has ratified a number of international treaties that proclaim the right to food, but which have not been incorporated into national law. This includes supporting the UN resolution on the right to food in 2019. There is no legal mechanism to enforce the right to food. As the motion sets out, the right to food is fundamental and should be enshrined in law. The legal right to food would mean an obligation on government to ensure that all its citizens have access to food. This would mean embedding the measurement of household food insecurity as a statutory obligation on the government, requiring an audit of all new legislation and budgetary measures that impact on people's income to ensure that new proposals do not leave people hungry. All future governments would need to show how their policies would impact on food insecurity. It will help people by meaning that government cannot enact policies that would drive people into food insecurity. This is a right that ideally should not be delivered via food vouchers. In order to get to grips properly with ending food poverty, we need measures to improve people's incomes, real living wage, universal basic income, controlling everyday costs, such as taking action on utility bills, and improving access to good food, such as free school meals. The motion rightly addresses digital poverty as a barrier to accessibility when accessing the holiday activity and food programme. But it is worth noting, following on from what Councillor Haynes has just said, that in our rural county, some families were unable to take up their free school meal entitlement during lockdown, not due to lack of digital access, but because they lived too far away from their school to justify the drive or taxi to go and collect their food. Society should seek to end holiday hunger by empowering local authorities and schools to build social partnerships to continue provision of meals in school holidays. It might be, for example, that school kitchens are used to prepare meals and taxis are used to take hot lunches to district community centres, much in the same way that central school kitchens send food via taxi to smaller schools during term time. Point F is particularly important at this moment and something to press the government on as it negotiates trade deals. The strategy recommends that the government should define a set of standards that we as a country believe should be applied in the production of the food we eat. At the same time as small-scale farmers and local grocery shops are disappearing, the country is increasingly dependent on food imports, and healthy food is too often unavailable or unaffordable. Our approach to food should consider both the social and environmental implications of the food system, which will improve quality of life for millions of people living in the UK. This is the moment for the government to step up.
Can I ask you to begin to wind up, please?
Yes, thank you. The government must take a lead, and we are very happy to support this motion. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Just before we go on, I've just come to our notice that one of the members of the council does have potentially has an interest which will be categorisable as other. So I think a note's been made. I don't know whether that wish that to be noted.
If Councillor Haynes wishes to speak.
Councillor Haynes, do you wish to speak, or is that sufficient? Councillor Huntley, would you like to respond?
Thank you very much, Lord Mayor. Just to say I'm very grateful to all members who have spoken on this motion and the comments that have been made. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Huntley. So we'll now move to the vote. All those who are against this motion, all those who wish to abstain on this motion, all those who are in favour of this motion. Okay. Those resolutions have been carried on unanimously. We're now on motion 9C, which is the motion on the Climate and Ecological Emergency Bill. An amendment to motion 9C has been received from Councillor Galvin. That has been circulated. Councillor Packer has indicated he's willing to accept this amendment. So if no other member objects, the amendment will become part of the substantive motion. As no member has objected, that is agreed. So I now call upon Councillor Packer to move motion 9C as amended.
Can you hear me? That's better. Thank you, Lord Mayor. The purpose of this motion is to call on central government to be more ambitious. We all know that the government's 2050 targets are not satisfactory, and even these are not being resourced fully. The Climate Change Committee has warned that Prime Minister Boris Johnson's remarkable long-term commitments to cut carbon emissions are being undermined by a lack of delivery with inadequate policies and poor implementation. Lord Debon, the chair of the advisory body, said while the target of reaching net zero by 2050 would set an example to other nations, the delivery has not been there. Almost all things that should have happened have either been delayed or not hit the mark. They need to step up very rapidly. The report from the committee has highlighted a number of areas of concern, particularly with regard to the Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, and with a lack of focus on climate change in the upcoming planning bill, while other key policies have been held back by the Treasury's delayed net zero review. Norwich City Council started its award-winning carbon management programme in 2007. This is why our operational emissions have reduced by 62.2% since then, even though the government stopped asking local authorities to record and reduce emissions over a decade ago. We are committed to net zero by 2030. We've declared a climate emergency. We are aiming to have a carbon neutral housing stock by 2030, even though our housing stock already achieves the central government target to upgrade as many fuel-poor homes as is reasonably practical to EPCC by the end of 2030. In November 2018, we published the City Vision 2040. This included a commitment to shift to clean energy by 2040, being carbon neutral by 2050. And at the time of publication, this was more ambitious than the government's 80% reduction target. Norwich City Council has been transparent and open about our environmental agenda. We've been publishing our operational emissions via Cabinet since 2008. We've also published our environmental strategy, carbon management plan, and environmental statement via Cabinet for cross-party discussion. The Council has SEEP to enable further discussion and allow cross-party recommendations to be made before papers are presented at Cabinet. And in addition, we also have Sustainable Development Panel for planning and other sustainability matters. Via our actions, we've proven we recognise that the evidence is clear. The costs of failing to address this crisis will far outstrip the investments required to prevent it. Investing now will bring many benefits in the form of good jobs, breathable cities and thriving communities. We know local authorities are playing and will continue to play an important role in the UK taking action to achieve net zero. However, we know if provided with the resources to deliver, we could achieve much, much more action and more quickly. I call on all parties to join with our administration with a united council, calling to government to give us the resources we need to deliver better than net zero by 2050. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Packer. I call upon Councillor Giles to second this motion.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Can you hear me? Good. I'm happy to second this motion. Many councils have actively supported this motion, and Norwich is right to join them. While the government's spin and rhetoric is good, they are simply failing to back this up with sufficient action. While President Biden in the US is investing $3 trillion over the next decade in clean energy and infrastructure, our government has pledged a tiny fraction of that. PwC says we need £40 billion of public and private investment each and every year over the next decade to get back on track for net zero. The government's proposals offer barely that over the 10 years put together. Labour recognises that the climate and ecological threat is so great and so urgent that the market alone cannot be relied on to deliver the necessary transformation. Furthermore, by relying on the market, they risk the burden of the green transition falling hardest on workers and consumers with the lowest means. We cannot afford to fail, and we cannot see a repeat of the unplanned deindustrialisation of the 1980s. Any transition must always be socially, economically and environmentally just, and therefore sustainable and receive popular public support. There are those who say that Labour would do nothing differently. However, Labour have been clear that a Labour government, by contrast, would bring forward £30 billion green stimulus package to create 400,000 jobs across the country. There are plenty of new jobs that will need to be created in Labour's green industrial revolution. Jobs in creating the green spaces we need, jobs insulating homes, jobs building green infrastructure, all jobs that could tackle the post-COVID unemployment crisis, particularly among young people. Despite limited resources, here in Norwich, our Labour Council is doing everything feasible to tackle the climate and ecological emergency with pioneering practical measures. We were the first council in the country to run a collector for reverse auction for domestic solar panels, and the first council to run a renewable-only collective switching scheme. And in 2019, we set up Raw Power, our own white-label renewable energy company. All measures which are simultaneously saving our residents money on fuel bills and cutting carbon emissions. And we have Goldsmith Street too, a shining beacon example of an award-winning, eco-friendly, sustainable and socially just housing development, breaking the link between low pay and poor housing. To solve our environmental and housing crisis, we need 1,000 more such schemes across this country now. And if the political will existed nationally, it could happen. Lord Mayor, I'm proud of the record of our Labour-led council, proud that our work has been recognised with a National ED Carbon Reduction Award.
Can you wind up?
Yeah. Lord Mayor, I'm happy to second this motion and hope all councillors will support this.
Thank you. I now invite group spokespersons to speak, beginning with Councillor Champion, and welcome your maiden speech.
Hello. It's good to be here. Hi. So I wholeheartedly, unreservedly think this is brilliant. I'm totally behind this motion of the Climate and Ecological Emergency Bill. And it's great to see it tabled at my first meeting, really behind it. And I feel that the motion which has been brought forward by Green MP Caroline Lucas and then supported by Clive Lewis really highlights how you can have cross-party cooperation working together on some of the most significant issues of our time. And I would hope that on a local level that we can also put aside our partisan differences to deal with these significant issues which surpass our bickering, I feel. Without dealing with the ecological emergency, we will sacrifice our biosphere, which underpins the entire basis of our civilization, and all of this becomes dirt and meaningless. And so I would hope that I can work with you over the coming years to make this a reality here in Norwich. My concern is that when I saw this motion, though, that although this is all really crucial and it's brilliant, and I love the words coming across the hall, and I really support them, but my concern is I've heard these words innumerable times over the last 20 years. I've been in a classroom teaching about the climate emergency, about climate change, and I've been having lots of students asking me, why don't the governments, why don't the councils do something? And I appreciate that there are actions happening, but my concern is that they're not enough. And when I look at the motion, some things which sprung to mind were, what does it mean that we're going to support the bill? What does it mean that, what difference does this motion actually make in a meaningful way? Do we anticipate contacting these MPs are they going to be swayed by this council's endorsement? Is that actually a thing? My concern is that this motion sends the wrong message, and that actually that we're giving the impression action has been taken when this isn't actually the case, that what we're doing is we're kicking down the can down the road and not really addressing all the issues. When I was cycling into the city today, I was behind a bus. That bus was spewing out fumes that were literally making me choke. Norwich is infamous for the fact that our buses are mostly second-hand buses from other councils that have taken meaningful initiatives to reduce their pollution levels. In addition to that, I'm a bit concerned earlier on in this meeting. I heard some very strong words in support of the council getting its funding from car parks, and that runs completely counter to the intent of this. And so in this very meeting, I've heard words which somehow, unapologetically go completely counter what I'm seeing and reading. I'm also a bit concerned. I'm really pleased, to hear that the biodiversity strategy is going to finally be coming and approaching and happening, which has taken a couple of years, apparently. And that's a real good step towards addressing the ecological emergency. But I have been contacted by residents in Norwich on allotments who've told me that there's been weed killer being sprayed on their allotments by the council. In my local park, just around the corner in Brantford Green, there's been weed killer which was accidentally sprayed. And so I feel that on the ecological side, I'm also not entirely, I'm not entirely convinced. And so I really hope that we can work together to bring this motion and create meaningful action. I feel like this motion is lovely words, but what I'd really like to see is meaningful action resulting from this, and possibly more cooperation and collaboration, so that we can actually bring our collective means to create meaningful ends. There we go. So, thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Champion. Councillor Lowick, I invite you to speak on behalf of the Lib Dems.
Like Councillor Packer and other councillors, I was contacted during the local election campaign by a resident who was passionate to promote this bill through a motion to council. It's an example of how effective grassroots movements can be when it comes to action on climate crisis. Why were they so passionate about the bill? I think it is because the Climate and the Ecological Emergency Bill tells the truth about the scale and urgency of the climate crisis and gives the framework for the kind of radical action we need to limit temperature rise to 1.5 degrees centigrade. An example is the inclusion in the bill of emissions from aviation and shipping. In a year where the UK has real influence globally on this issue through the COP26 summit, the UK could set a new standard internationally for environmental legislation at an absolutely critical time for the planet, the decisive decade for tackling climate change. The CE bill is a piece of national legislation which will be discussed and voted on in Westminster, but if its ambitious targets are to be reached, local government will be of vital importance in achieving those targets. By local councils declaring support for the bill, it shows the government that there is a will at local level to make this work, and particularly in managing the balance of reducing emissions while maintaining local biodiversity. So far, the government are failing to deliver on their previous promises of action. They talk a good talk, but when it comes to walking the walk, they are failing to act, including the hypocrisy of approving a new oil field equivalent to 16 new coal power stations in the run-up to hosting the global COP26 summit. Even the government's own advisors on climate change have just warned that the UK is even less prepared for climate change than we were 5 years ago. However, Greenpeace are saying that there is still a window of opportunity to make comprehensive plans and demonstrate leadership at home and to a global audience, and that Boris Johnson knows that climate leadership is one thing history will judge him on. Action on the climate crisis requires not just high-level national and international targets, but also the local commitment to make these work in practice, demonstrating a clear commitment to rapid and radical action to deal with these unprecedented crises. It is clear that the costs of inaction are far less than the costs of it's clear that the costs of action are far less than the costs of inaction. The Liberal Democrats therefore wholeheartedly support the motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lubbock. Are there any other councillors who wish to indicate to speak? We have one. And I will take... Sorry, we've got two, have we? We've got three now. Okay. I will take them because the Constitution says that you may, but I must say I'm very disappointed because there was a meeting between the leaders, and in order to help the business of this council to progress, an agreement had been come to that there would be no other speakers. I will let them speak, but I wish my disappointment to be known. We've had a move to a vote, and I'm just going to turn to the legal advisor at this point and ask what effect this has on the rest of the debate. Okay, I've just had chapter and verse from the person who knows. We've had a motion to move to a vote. Is there a seconder for that motion? We have that motion seconded. And now we move directly to a vote on this motion, that we go straight to a vote. Well, I heard, I can repeat, he moved to a vote, and he actually gave the Constitution standing order number, which I can't recall, but I'm sure if you want to find out, it will be given to you. We've had a move to a vote, and I think I'm going to turn to the legal advisor because the move to vote is under the Constitution. Okay, I'll repeat myself, but let me just stop for a moment. So it's 71K. You can look. And just to repeat myself, because obviously not everybody heard it, we will now move directly to a vote on whether or not to go to a vote on the main motion. Okay, is that clear? In other words, there will be no further, if this motion is carried, there will be no further debate. We will then go straight to a vote on the motion 9C. Okay. So we've had this motion and it's been seconded. Can we find again in reverse order all those who are against this move to a vote? Excuse me, can we observe the normal rules of debate and decorum? Thank you. So we've got 13 against. Anybody who wished to abstain on the motion that we move directly to a vote? There are no abstentions. All those who are in favour? No, sorry. some problems with cancelling between the columns. Could those who are voting in favour, or do you want the whole thing? Yes, those who have voted in favour. Sorry, I should have raised my hand. Okay. So 13 people have voted against the move to a vote. 24 have voted to move to a vote. That motion is carried, and we therefore move. So we move back. Now, Councillor Packer is able to respond, and then we will vote on this motion 9C. I have just been shown under K2 of that part of the standing orders that what I've just said is the correct thing for once. Councillor Packer, would you like to respond?
Wonderful. I will be brief. First of all, I'd like to thank all councillors for their views who've spoken so far. I was going to say I had thought it was good there hadn't been any bickering. In relation to the comments by Councillor Champion and his concerns, I would just briefly highlight that some of the actions this Labour administration has taken has been to reduce its own carbon emissions by 62%, helping the fuel poor through the provision of a range of affordable warmth work to reduce fuel poverty, including energy-efficient improvements to private households, helping to reduce the emissions of the city. We started one of the largest mixed-tenure passive house developments in Europe. And lastly, Norwich City Council was named as a top local authority in Norfolk and one of the best in the country on a number of issues related to climate change. In a wide-ranging survey by environmental organisation Friends of the Earth, the City Council was ranked joint 15th nationally out of 350 local authorities surveyed. And I would, just to follow on from Councillor Champion's concerns about what we should be doing or not doing with income from our car parks, I respect all criticism of what this council does, but I would like councillors, when they think that we shouldn't be taking income from our car parks, to highlight which of our non-statutory services they would cut if we were not to have that income. Would it be reducing the 100% council tax reduction policy for the most vulnerable that we have? And I believe we are one of the only councils in Norfolk to have that. Would we need to sell off our green spaces to generate that income? So I would just reiterate, I do appreciate and welcome constructive criticism. What I would say, though, is that if councillors are asking the council to reduce our income streams, that at the very least they provide information of where they would make up the financial shortfall. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Packer. We will now take a vote on motion 9C as has been amended. In reverse order, all those who wish to vote against 9C. All those who wish to abstain on this vote. Nope. All those who are in favour of motion 9C. Okay, that is unanimous. Now, I must at this stage point out we've passed the 9:30 mark. There are two motions left. Can those two... Sorry. Can they be taken, those two last items, as unopposed business? Agreed? Does anybody wish to oppose? No. Thank you. Then we consider them passed. We move to the end of the night. That's the end of the meeting. Thank you for your attendance. Thank you for your indulgence at a couple of moments in my chairing. But overall, a good night and good business carried out. Thank you.
Can I ask you to be upstanding to the Lord Mayor?